let's go with a very simple video today. It's all about painting. I'm going to show you just a few things here. Going with Vallejo paint, Vallejo liquid mask to cover up that emblem, Mr. Super Clear to cover up the work and protect it, some of the Testors paint, and of course a medium and a small brush of your choice. I prefer synthetic brushes. So let's get started with what I did here. So this is not a how-to video, but more or less to show you the actual finished product and to tell you what I did. I did cover up that emblem with the liquid mask so that I would not tint it in any way. So I covered it up entirely all the way around it. And then I came back and I painted it in yellow. And then I gave it a black wash over that. Once that was dry, I went ahead and masked that with the liquid mask so that I can then use the dark gray on the actual body. And the dark gray that you see there is actually ink. It is Liquitex ink, and it actually does take a while for it to take. You have to rub it in there and then it will finally soak into the plastic, and in this case it's more of a vinyl, and then it will actually tint it and it will actually take really well. So you have to do it in thin layers, otherwise it can go too dark on you and just be entirely black. So if you want to keep a different tonal rendition, then I would consider using less of it, or even using an airbrush to give you the different tonal variations. I went with pretty much a single tone all through the latex. Well, it's not armor, it's more of the body suit. But as you can tell, it's all dry brushing on the belt, and of course the armor on the, it's not armor, it's more of the gauntlets. The bracers, actually, that's the correct term. And each of those spikes is painted in a silver. I did paint the leather with the craft paints that I have because they actually take pretty well for something like this, and it's an alternative to using the more expensive paint. So it actually turns out pretty well. Now, the rest of the body itself, which is the skin tone, I painted it so it would show like a transition starting with the face. So you do have some skin tone over the gray, showing that he's not fully transformed into a, well, DarkFather. So I used my Testors paints and I mixed them in very lightly with the craft paint that you see in the background there, and it works out really well. It takes very well for this. It does dry down with a slight texture, so I ended up using a gloss, Model Masters semi-gloss to go over it, and then it gave you a more of a shine to the skin. But again, it's all going to be your preference. You don't have to give it a shine to the skin. It can be just a matte finish. You could spray it with Mr. Super Clear and protect that way and give it a matte finish on the skin tone. But I like to have a different texture or tone to each one of the particular areas. The belt itself, that one is dry brushed. It's also and that's actually using craft paints as well too. But because I'm using the craft paints and it's just in very thin layers, it works out really well. And when those dry down, they dry down in a matte finish. So then I do have to go back in there and use a semi-gloss or a gloss, depending on the article, and then giving it that sheen that I want it to have, either to look like leather or metal, etc. So it just depends on what you want your finished look. A lot of people went with the black bat emblem in the light gray on the suit. I just didn't want it to look the same as everybody else's. Now I did mix in my Testors paint with the craft paint that's in the background that you see there. And these two different brands actually mix in pretty well. And because the craft paint goes down to, or dries down to a matte finish, it actually counteracts that high gloss finish of the Testors. And it turns out pretty well, and it doesn't peel and crack as you would otherwise think so. It actually turns out really well, and they're both fairly inexpensive paints. They're getting a little harder to acquire in the Testors brand because they are phased out. They're owned by a different company now, so that's why I've been using the Vallejo paints more often. But in any case, I did use a sponge, as you see in the video, to give it more texture and tone down those reds on the skin because I wanted it to have a more natural transition, changing into DarkFather. So this is what he looks like once he's all prepped and ready to go, and I've sprayed some Mr. Super Clear on him to protect all of that detail work that I did, and he definitely looks a lot better. But now let's go in with a black wash to highlight some of those textures, not necessarily on his suit, but on his cape, because the cape is just pretty dull. It's just blue. So I'm using Liquitex ink. It is not a paint, it is an ink, so it takes very little of it, and I am spreading it on with a sponge to get into those deep crevices, and I'm going to wipe away the excess so that the raised texture is not affected by it. I just want to create some contour and some shadowing into those deeper areas. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to hit it with a different paint. So I'm using my brush to get into these crevices as best I can because the sponge is just not doing the job for me. And I'm only going to do it on the back side, not on the inside of the cape, as I want it to remain different so I can have a whole different what do you call it, mood or look to the actual figure. So it does dry very quickly, so you actually have to have your sponge damp so that it doesn't dry on you as you are working it. And with the damp sponge, then you can go back over certain areas and re-moisten that wash, and then you can move it around, manipulate it so that you can get an even look all over the actual cape. If it dries down too quickly, then you're going to have some splotchy areas. My brush technique, I'm going to go ahead and add my Testors turquoise paint. And again, in a dry brush technique, so I am not overloading the brush, just enough to go over onto the texture and cause and create a contrast of color so that you can actually see the cape when it reflects off of the light. So as you can tell here, I'm just picking up very little amounts, and I'm going only over the folds that are actually protruding up, not going into the crevices or the folds that are deep, only on the ones that are going to reflect the light. And that's going to give me a more three-dimensional look on the cape itself. It's already actually it's a well-made cape. The only thing is it stays in one spot. It's not flexible, it's not moldable. It's molded to be to have one single look. It's a relaxed look, but it looks good on it. The inside of it, as you can tell, I did not paint because I'm really having no interest in it, and it's not going to be something that takes or needs any more attention. It's on the inside, so it's not going to be seen as readily as the exterior. Now, because it is a dry brushing, as you can tell here, if I over exceed the tone, because my sponge has a dampness to it, I can wipe away some of that excess. And this is what the cape looks like all finished, and it's dry because it's pretty much a wash, and it's very thin, so it dries quickly just in air temperature. but of course you can speed it up with a hairdryer and then hit it with a super clear to keep it permanent and protected. Don't forget to paint the cowl as well with that turquoise, and of course the trunks and the boots. It'll give it more definition. If it's important to you to paint the inside of the cape, go ahead and do so. Here's the items that were used. The Vallejo paint, I used the different grays. I also used Liquitex paint, or actually ink on the actual suit. Some liquid mask, Mr. Super Clear, Testors paint that I mentioned already, and medium and a small brush to get into those details, the gauntlets and the actual suit, as you saw in the cape. Now, this was just a very quick video showing you a few tips with the dry brushing. I don't have to show you how to take this figure apart because it comes in pieces. It's up to you to decide how you want this figure to look, as unique as you want it to, or as cookie cutter as everybody else's. It's all up to you. In the meantime, if you liked the video, give me a comment, a like, and of course, please subscribe. And don't forget to keep customizing. I'll leave you with some video.